Okay, folks, we are just at 12:30, so we're going to get rolling. I am going to start our slide show here. Bear with me as we get things going. It's always a fun adventure into technology here. Okay, so welcome to DCNR Trail Gap Collection using the Trail Implementation Manager. We have this session scheduled for about an hour, but I think we're going to be able to wrap it up a little quicker than that and give folks a good chance to enjoy their lunch hour. I'm Chris Corbran with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. I'm a program coordinator with Trails and Recreation. I've been with PEC for about 5 years. My primary area of focus is the Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition, which is a 4-state initiative looking to connect existing and support developing trails with a proposed total of over 1,500 miles. That's me in the top right doing some scouting up in Erie County along the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Corridor. We get into the real meat of the presentation. Let's just touch base on a few housekeeping items. Number one, participants will be muted, so feel free to snack on something crunchy without worrying about disturbing the rest of us. Number two, we will be recording this webinar for future viewing. So if you have someone in your organization who wanted to learn about the process that we're employing here, or you just need to reference something that we talk about today at a later date, we will host the video online and make sure we get that link out to all of our trail friends in the Commonwealth. Number three, since everyone is going to be muted and we're talking like typical webinar style, please direct your questions to the Q&A box. We'll have some time to hit the questions at the end, but if something really important and relevant comes up, we'll do our best to address it along the way. We also have the chat box rolling. Feel free to chat with me if it's something that might need my direct attention. And my coworker out of our Philadelphia office, Zhenya, is also going to be helping monitor as well. Okay, so by now I'm sure we can all rehearse this first piece by heart, but just to really nail it home, one of the 7 major recommendations of the 2020 to 2024 Pennsylvania Trail Plan is to close priority trail gaps in Pennsylvania's statewide trail network with the overall goal of having a trail within 10 miles of every Pennsylvanian. I think we all know this one. It's really made the rounds. I ran into it just the other day, so I know it's a popular question and recommendation out there. This trail gap process is primarily a DCNR process to support the Bureau of Rec and Con in better understanding the needs and challenges and costs of trail groups and trail projects statewide. So you might be wondering then where PEC fits into all this. So in comes the TIM. You may have heard about the TIM, or the Trail Implementation Manager tool, in a past Greenways and Trails session, or this might be kind of a brand new topic for you. The TIM is a crowdsourced platform for collaborative trail data management. This means that multiple stakeholders can all update trail data in the same space at the same time. We kind of designed this tool with the intent of cutting out some of the redundancy and confusion that exists when you have to hunt through like a long email thread for trail information. If you're passing details back and forth or communicating about a certain part of the process, we hope to use this tool to streamline those tasks for our trail partners. It also works to create an institutional memory. We know that different people shift in and out of the trails world, and sometimes if we don't have a good system in place to make sure that their knowledge gets recorded and stays with the organization rather than the person, we run the serious risk of losing a lot of that, that mental bandwidth that has been employed so far. I always like to bring this up, that we don't want to forget our roots. The TIM tool didn't really just develop in a desert or a vacuum. Go to Trails, the Circuit Trails pipeline tool, and the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Manager were all stepping stones in developing the TIM tool. All of the feedback we received from the early pipeline tool and the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Manager helped inform the design and the functionality of the TIM. So we can think of the Circuit Trails Manager and the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Manager as two beta versions of the TIM, really. Their intent was the same, but they were specific to their geographical areas, different sides of the state. As we learned things from the two tools, we decided it would really made more sense to combine them into one central place, and that's how we got to the TIM. A little bit more about how we got, really to start thinking about the TIM as a mechanism for collecting gap information is that, during the pandemic, new funding was kind of sprouting up everywhere. And the PEC team had a few discussions with BRC staff on the topic of shovel-ready trail segments. We kind of learned quickly and collectively that although there's plenty of useful information out there, there's also an opportunity to improve how we access and collect that information. So we offered to build out the TIM with a DCNR facing function that allowed for this trail gap collection. Here's a quick look at our workflow, the process we're employing. We know that the TIM has the capacity to pull in and manage and organize all this trail gap data, but really the responsibility for submitting a gap and updating the information related to it lies with the trail group and the organization that is the primary stakeholder for this trail gap. Let's keep this in mind as we walk through some of the steps in the next slides. Part one. So this is the intake form. The intake form is really the first step in making sure that we start pulling in some of the basic information. This is a great slide because unless your organization is part of the Circuit Trails or Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Network, you'll need to fill out an intake form. The reason behind that is that we have some trail segment information for these two big systems. We've worked with the Circuit Trails Coalition for years and have developed some pretty good robust mapping for Southeast Pennsylvania. We also worked with members of the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Alliance in 2019 to break down the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail Corridor, as well as the PA Wilds Loop, which is kind of that extra portion that heads into towards the Allegheny National Forest, into more granular sections. The push for this specifically came from a technical support grant PEC received through the Appalachian Regional Commission to take a more cohesive look at trail gaps along these corridors. So this is the intake form. It's basically what we need to start to build organization profiles for trail groups. The link is on the right. I hope it's active for folks. If not, we can make sure it is in the chat, and it will definitely be included in some of our future correspondence. We've had some groups already filling out the intake form, and we've kind of done our first pass at starting to build out these profiles based on the information that we receive in the intake form. It's a simple Google form that everybody should be able to access. And while there are many different options out there, we're trying to stick with the lowest common denominator when it comes to ease and usability. One thing I don't want to forget to mention is that for every gap that your trail organization, your group wishes to submit, we'll need one intake form. It's definitely a lot to ask for folks, but in the interest of keeping things organized, we do ask that you fill out one intake form per gap. I know some of our folks out there who are involved in longer trail corridors probably will be submitting multiple gaps for consideration. In this case, we'll just need multiple intake forms. So on the intake form, we have a space at the bottom. And this is really a key part of the intake form. It's the call for GIS line work. The benefit of using the TIM in this way is that we can help make things easier for our friends at BRC. The current gap mapping exists primarily as point data. We'd like to change this so that your gaps are viewable as actual lines in the map, which makes it easier to see where the gaps fit in relationship to existing trails, other developing assets, public lands that might be in the area and all that good stuff. Before I go on, I did want to mention as well that sometimes trying to drum up GIS information is tough, especially if you don't have a great background in it. Don't worry too much. At the bottom of the form is a link to a video, just a quick and dirty video that I created on how to create a GPX file using Ride with GPS. It's a online-based platform that was really created to track your exercise, but is pretty useful in some basic planning as well. So if you don't have a GPX file or that GIS ability, don't worry. Check out the link. If you still have some trouble with it, you can definitely get in touch with me directly, and we'll make sure that we can get that line work updated related to your segment. One other point that I want to make is that we know that sometimes there are sensitivities regarding the alignments of some trail gaps. If you have some concerns over actually marking these lines, also reach out to me directly. In these cases, we will probably still ask for your line work, but when it comes to entering them into the TIM tool, we'll just show them as points in the TIM. This way, we're trying to limit the amount of heck you might catch just in case a map makes it into the public sphere. Not something that we anticipate happening, but we are always looking to ways to limit the challenges that we get into with adjacent landowners or other folks who may not be so thrilled with developing trails as we are. Here's just a quick look at some of the current point data along with the line work. The point is pulled directly from DCNR's database. The line work is from some of the circuit trails mapping. We can see obviously that there are a pretty close match, but it's not direct. So in some cases, as we try to reconcile the point data with some of the line work that groups submit, we might just have to do a little back and forth scrubbing and communication to make sure that we are really looking at the same space. I think this also illustrates the fact that with just the point and no line work, it's a little bit hard to tell really what we're looking at. It doesn't really show a gap or part of a trail alignment, just a general area where there might be something else that you're referring to. So let's move on to part 2. But before we do, I noticed we had one question pop up. The question goes back to the Circuit Trails Coalition. So if we have groups who are part of the Circuit Trails Coalition, do they need to fill out an intake form? And for the most part, I'm going to say no, they don't, because for most organizations, we already have organization profiles built out in the TIM tool. We might have to do some back and forth just to make sure we are linking the segment information that we currently have with whatever gap that you would like to submit, but we don't really need to do full-on intake form for those groups. Let's see, just doing a quick look at our Q&A box, make sure we're good. Okay, so we have can we put the link to the intake form in this box? I think we can. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to try to pull it up in the middle of all this madness, but I'm not too worried about it. We'll see where we can get to. I'm also going to encourage folks to share the link to the intake form with other folks who you might be seeing on a regular basis. If they're unfamiliar to this process or if they have any questions, shoot them to the intake form first, and I'd be happy to follow up if further questions arise. Okay, so we got the link to the intake form in the chat. I think we addressed our Circuit Trails question, and we will just keep on rolling. So user accounts, that's where we are next. After filling out the intake form, PEC works with our friends over at Environmental Planning and Design to create project profiles for each of the submitted gaps. Once we have this step in place, we'll notify the contacts who submitted the intake forms that they're ready for the next step. This next step, meaning individuals can create their own specific user accounts in the TIM. So to just reiterate really quickly, we have kind of two things going on. One, we have the creation of organization profiles made possible by the intake form. And then to follow up, we have these individual user accounts needed to actually interact with the functions of the TIM. We have the link for the TIM in the side pane, and I'm going to see if I can actually put it in the chat here in a minute as well. Okay, so new users who are totally new also see this little sign up button at the bottom. So if your organization isn't already in the TIM, then you're not part of the Circuit Trails or Erie to Pittsburgh or PA Wilds Loop, you'll want to hit that sign up button, and that will be like the first step in creating your individual account. There will be a drop down where you can select which group and which region you're affiliated with. And without having the profile built out from the intake form first, you won't see the organization that you're most closely related to. We'll pause a minute just to clarify as well. We had a question in the chat. Are we talking only about hiking and biking trails, or horse, ATV, water trails as well? At the moment, the tool has the capacity to pull this stuff all in. So if you are submitting any sort of DCNR gap, feel free to use the tool to make this happen. Right now, it is geared maybe a little bit more heavily to trail non-motorized trail use, but the structure is still appropriate for some of those other uses, except water trails. Thank you. That's one good one to clarify. That one's a little bit more of an outlier in this world. Okay, so once our new users have had a chance to create their login, they'll come to this screen right here, and this is their project hub, their dashboard. When you log in and you come to your dashboard here, you will see and have access to as many segments as intake forms that you've submitted. So everyone's dashboard will look a little bit different. Right now, we're looking at the PEC dashboard. So we have a good number of segments that we have some direct involvement in. It gives users a pretty quick look into some of the key stats of the trails that they're involved with. It also shows kind of the total mileage and status of some of these segments. Okay, this topic always comes up, so we'll take a minute to address it as well. We're going to talk quickly about permissions in the tool. Each trail group will only be able to update segments that they are primarily responsible for. Depending on your permissions level, you may also be able to view segments where neighboring trail groups have added your organization as an other stakeholder. If your organization wishes to have multiple users update gap info, we can do that. PEC will work and communicate with the primary contact who submitted the intake form to make sure that additional users are authorized or valid folks who the trail group wishes to make sure or make it available for them to make changes in the tool. Part 3, gap details. So this is going to relate to updating project profiles as well as gap profiles. From the dashboard or the project hub, users can click on any of the blue arrows from the list on the bottom left to pull up a project profile which holds details for each particular segment. So we'll get a little bit more of a zoomed in view. This is that space on the left. So clicking on one of those, the segment arrows from the dashboard leads you to this project profile screen. Most of the users who have access to the TIM will be able to update the details related to their particular segment in this tab. They can also use the Files tab in the middle there to upload specific documents related to the segment. It could be an easement, it could be a conceptual drawing. Almost all users will have that ability. Users can also navigate from their project profile to the DCNR Gap Info tab. But before we move on to that, I wanted to make one quick mention of some of the other functions and spaces on the project profiles. The status boxes that I have circled in red here are viewable by DCNR staff who have access to the tool, or I'm sorry, they are viewable to the trail organizations, but they are hidden in most cases to DCNR staff. So any nuances related to a trail segment that are specific to your group or to your segment, you can enter in here. Sometimes things just don't fit one of the status boxes that you can see right now. And in that case, it's good to just keep some free form notes in the segment description and other comments boxes right there. One of the things that I think is also good to remember is that while access to the tool is guarded and protected at a pretty high level, if you have anything that's very sensitive, do not put it in these boxes. Keep that stuff a little bit closer to the cuff. Okay, so a relevant question just popped up in the chat as well. How much of this information will be visible to the public and how much is just internal for the Trails community? Good question. So primarily the information in the TIM tool is really specific to Trail community. We're not advertising this as an end user tool that somebody can just hop on to check out what the status of developing trails might be. You can't really access this information without an approved user account. And if you're not part of a trail organization, it's going to be pretty tough to get that user account. So most of it is sort of like internal among the broader trail community. But I always feel like it's a good idea to say, just in case anything that you're working on is a little bit too sensitive, keep it separate from the tool. While we have the space and the ability to enter it in here, just use your best judgment in that field. So let's hop back over to the Gap tab. The Gap tab in the project profile holds all the fields that you'll need for submitting your Gap. Some fields will be auto-populated based on the intake form, but definitely not all of them. Like the segment, part of the segment profile, part of the project profile, there is a map on the screen also that is interactive. You can zoom, you can pan, you can do some basic measurement too. So you do have that ability to measure out the distance of your gap or its relationship to some of the developing pieces next to it. In this screen, you also have the opportunity to mark trail usage and some of these other bits and pieces on the right that we'll take a little bit, just a quick closer look at. One of the benefits of using the TIM tool to pull in this information is that everything that is in the tool and in these specific status boxes can be filtered. And we can use the tool to run reports to have a better idea of how many common criteria are being selected. So if we're trying to determine how many gaps are mountain biking gaps, we can help our trail partners and our friends at DCNR run a report that pulls in all of the submitted mountain biking gaps. We can also use some of the stats in the tool to determine the specific length of all of the trail gaps that have been submitted. We had one other quick question in the chat about how much can other trail groups see, and that really depends on a few factors. And I'm not going to run too deeply into it at this session because we have a follow-up that will address that in the future. But it really depends on your permission and whether or not you've been marked as like a partner in another organization's trail segment. There are some things that are viewable, and usually those are the basics of that trail segment, as well as some of the status buttons. But for the most part, if you are a user that is outside looking into another organization's segment, you are definitely limited on some of the extra pieces you can see. You won't have access to the files that may have been uploaded. You won't be able to see some of those comment and extra boxes. Or some of the action items also. So we want to use the tool to encourage some collaboration between trail groups, but at the same time, protect the information that is specific and unique to some trail segments. So let's move on to part 4, DCNR evaluation. This part kind of includes a few different steps or approaches that DCNR staffs anticipate going through. It's really kind of like how DCNR folks can use the TIM and how we expect this to roll. So number 1, evaluate trail groups for eligibility to be designated a priority trail gap or a top 10 trail gap. Check out the links on the left too if you need to see the current state of some of that mapping. We know that plenty of trail groups submit gaps that currently don't meet the definition of a priority trail gap. We can use the tool to check out and gauge whether or not that submitted gap really meets the current definitions. But it's still good to have captured and organized this info using the TIM, because we know that as groups work to develop some trail segments, that eligibility could change. So that's definitely something that we want to keep relevant, even if it doesn't currently fit the bill. Number 2, another way that DCNR staff can use the tool is to analyze funding needs for projects that help close gaps. For instance, if a number of trail groups in close proximity to each other all have similar needs or funding requests, could we gauge some economies of scale to approach some projects that may have otherwise gone unrealized. 3, we hope to be able to use the tool to coordinate funding approaches between state agencies, especially in some large-scale infrastructure pieces. It's possible to pull in additional funding from other sources in order to more efficiently complete some of these projects. And the better our baseline data set is, the easier it is to know the current status of a developing trail segment and how that could be optimized and leveraged to a bigger effect. Number 4, assist with statewide planning efforts to advance trails. I think this one is right on the money. If our friends at DCNR can draw on a complete data set that really represents the state of the projects around the Commonwealth, it helps them plan it and prioritize trail projects and assignments more effectively. And that's really what we're hoping to do with the TIM tool. So what's happening in the future? Where is this all heading? So while this current phase of trail gap collection seeks really only to pull in standalone trail gap info into the TIM, we do envision that subsequent phases can involve incorporating a trail group's full inventory of segmented trail data for even more comprehensive information. I think this is really one of the biggest benefits to trail groups looking to better understand and sort and report on the status of all their developing trails. And that's really where the TIM tool kind of shines, is this ability to provide some really key services to trail groups. All right, just to recapitulate, this quick session has been really to present the approach to collecting trail gap info with a different mechanism, the TIM. Trail groups are responsible for completing an intake form. PEC will notify organizations when their baseline data is built into the TIM. Individuals can then create user accounts and update their segment and gap info. We think it's a benefit to DCNR staff and can work to streamline some of their tasks like reviewing grant applications and planning future trails. And while we really only scratch the surface, that's what I'm looking for, on the process that we're using to use the TIM to collect trail gap info, we are going to have a follow-up webinar scheduled to focus more on like a detailed walkthrough of the TIM functions. It's pretty straightforward and intuitive for the most part, but you know, we do want to offer that walkthrough to some of the folks who will actually be doing a lot of the detailed work, submitting and updating their segment info. I also want to mention that our timeline on this is definitely still developing. It is, you know, reacting to some of our pressures and new things that always come up in the trail world. But we won't keep submitting intake forms indefinitely, but we will probably do it at least until late fall. So while we definitely encourage you to get those intake forms in as soon as possible, and we can then in turn, you know, get you going in the TIM. If there's a little bit of lag time between, you know, hearing this webinar, seeing the functionality piece of this, and submitting that information, we're going to be as flexible as possible to you. We've got the link to the next webinar there in the side pane, and I'm going to make sure it gets into the chat here in just a minute. And I know that was a quick run through. It's some interesting stuff overall, I think, but we're going to take some time to hit some of the other questions that popped up in the Q&A. Do my best here to make sure we hit them. So we had one pop up about uploading files to the TIM tool segment, and the short answer to that is yes. We can definitely put larger files, study files into the TIM tool, and really that's kind of one of the best applications of that function in the tool, because often, you know, if we need to share you know, 100-page study back and forth, it's usually not something that we can just email, you know, between our trail partners. Typically it's create a Google Drive link or, you know, host it in Dropbox, which is great, but it doesn't really attach it to a specific segment in the broader regional trail look. So that's definitely one of the things that the tool can accommodate. But once again, that part of the functionality is likely going to be at a second phase. So this piece is really just trail gap data collection with hopefully a follow-up that really pulls in all of the trail corridor or trail groups segmented info, sort of like we've done with the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail, PA Wilds Loop, and the circuit trails. So thanks for putting that question out there as well. So we have, let's see, will we be emailing the link to get folks started in the TIM? Yep, it's gone out a couple times so far, but we'll make sure that everyone who has participated in you know, this session, this little afternoon session, will have that link to the TIM and the intake form. I know I've had some folks dive into this already, which has been great. We also have had some folks who have sort of kind of skipped that intake form step. So we've done a little bit of back and forth communicating to just make sure that folks do this process in the correct order: intake form and then user accounts in the TIM. We have another question in the chat in the Q&A. Who is a good point of contact to discuss gap specifics? I think it really depends on the question overall. This one in the chat that I'm sure you know, other folks can identify with is that a group has larger gaps, but each gap has different projects or different sections. In that case, I would say that each individual project should have its own piece. So I approach this thinking that the more granular we can segment a trail corridor, even if it's a gap, is beneficial, because we know that in most cases, those components are going to happen at different times, or there will be a specific approach to each thing. In some of our work on the Erie to Pittsburgh Trail, we started with longer segments that included, maybe a piece of trail, a road crossing, like an old trestle bridge, and then another piece of trail. And while it's great to have all that stuff collected in one unit, when we actually approach it, those two pieces of trail might be one project together, and then a road crossing often can be another, bridge rehab, even one more. So I like to go at the most granular level and then work from that. So I know that takes a little bit more work, but it's really the way that gives us the most clear picture of the needs for that segment. But also, I will be happy to talk about that with folks individually and see how we can best communicate that through the TIM. I'm putting my email address in the chat for folks. I will be available as often as I can to make sure that we address all these needs. It's funny. I always feel like we can do everything possible to create a new tool, create a new way to do this. And there's always like the human factor that I always want to be involved in as much as possible. As somebody who, rides bikes and spends all of his time outside and hanging out with trail folks, I love learning about what folks have going on. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out, even if it's just for a quick question. I'm going to take another scroll through and make sure that we've hit most of the relevant questions so far. Oh, okay. And yes, I will drop the other Zoom link into the chat here in just a minute. The second Zoom session will also be recorded, and we'll send that information out to all of our trail partners that are on some of these email lists. Some folks might get a couple emails. Sometimes DCNR and BRC staff send some things out. You might get a follow-up from PEC. We're doing everything that we can to make sure that this information gets out there as broadly as possible. All right, second webinar link should be in the chat. Hopefully everybody has access and can see that. Each webinar, this one and obviously the one that follows it, does ask you to register, and that's usually the best way to make sure that you get those reminders that it's coming up and all that good stuff. So let's see, I might have one more slide here to make sure we've got all of our bases covered. That's it. So thanks again, everybody. I encourage you to go ahead and complete your intake forms. Don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you for walking through this process, and hopefully you come away with a slightly better understanding, and we left enough time for you to enjoy the rest of your lunch hour. Till next time, take care.